Welcome back, and this chapter, first, I'm getting it out a lot quicker than I have been the previous ones, and second, it was a very interesting chapter. It kind of ties in together concepts that were introduced in the previous chapters, and the whole, like throughout the whole chapter, chapter four, it kind of revolves around the topic of what they call, well, what I understood to be like a paper shredder. It was like a paper disposal thing called memory holes, right? And if last chapter shows gaslighting and what the government's doing to everyone, what Big Brother does to um, make everything go according to their plan, this one explains some of the methods that they use to do it and how Winston's kind of involved in it, which was not something that I expected. And the whole like chapter happens in the Ministry of Truth in the Department of Records where Winston works. So we get like a good look at inside his workplace and what he does throughout the day. And okay, so the concept of a paper shredder is introduced, but the paper is like burned instead, like I said. They have a bunch of these things, like every other hallway, I guess, or multiple in the same hallway, where people just like drop in papers that are to be destroyed, right? And they could be like journals, um, documents, records, books, anything of that sort that is deemed unnecessary anymore, or I guess destructive to the ideology of Big Brother. And it's said that there are tens of thousands in the building in every hall, right? And this is where we get a good look into his workplace, right? So he gets like the speak right thing to, unless I'm remembering a little wrong, I might be a little iffy on the details, but the speak right thing like drops out the little slips of paper that he is to follow. At first, we get a good example of three that he has to follow, or basically like instructions for what he's supposed to do. Then, after he burns it to leave no trace of there being anything that was changed, and you'll see why soon enough, right? So, he gets the slips, and it's like written in Newspeak words, but the sentence is not. It doesn't follow Newspeak grammar, but then all the words are Newspeak, and it's like basically like jot notes that someone would do when they're in school. To they use those notes to avoid having to write down so much, right? And it'll be like, okay, do rectify, fix, um like maybe he'll do like a little task, right? They're basically little tasks that he's supposed to do, and then he has to like throw out the paper afterwards. And it said that the action of like just crumpling it up and tossing it into the bin is so like it's just natural, right? It's like they don't even have to think a second thought about it, right? Because they're so used to this job. And so what he had to throw in the disposals. What he had were notes of corrections that were needed to be made from some speeches that Big Brother had, like, I guess spoken like in the prior weeks. And they mentioned like some predictions, and the predictions were false. They predicted that Eurasia would um attack North Africa, and that the Indian front would be, I guess they're talking about a war, right? And the Indian front would be fairly peaceful, like nothing of note happening over there, right? But instead, the opposite happened, and Winston had to rectify this because they can't have Big Brother making wrong predictions, which goes to show, well, they don't like admit when they're wrong. Everyone's just gonna believe the new truth, right? So they were wrong. The prediction that Big Brother made that the North Indian, or that the yeah North Indian, no, that um the African place would, well, the African war zone would be attacked, right? But it was Indian. it was the Indian one that was attacked. Sorry, and so he had to rectify that prediction. And another example is the reduction of chocolate rations, which was promised not to take place earlier on, like I guess like sometime before like the book starts, right? Before the book starts, it was promised that the chocolate rations would not be reduced, but they were reduced by 30 grams, right? And to make it seem like Big Brother didn't have to go back on a statement that they had made or a promise that they had made, he has to rectify that as well. So he writes the new speech that Big Brother had done in the past, which they didn't. So it's just he's making it up as they go, and they're rewriting the history to make it seem like Big Brother was always truthful. So this is why it's the Ministry of Truth in the Department of Records. So they remove any record of anything that did not come to pass or did not happen that Big Brother had said would come to pass or happen, and they rewrite it. And then there's new like files that are printed, and they go and replace all the old files. And then they have, apparently it was mentioned that there's like some higher up people in the Department of Records. There's different branches, and the highest one is like basically like spies, like assassins, but they're just killing all the old records. They have to go recollect anything that, like, because the the Ministry of Truth is responsible for like all sorts of media, well, all media in general. So like children's books, pamphlets, brochures, journals, books, movies, photographs, and if anything needs to be rectified, it's them who goes and does it. So that's why it's the Ministry of Truth. So they take away the new false truth, or they take away the false truth and replace it with a new truth, which is just equally as false. Because it was also said in the book, it doesn't really matter that they're replacing the old with the new, because the old was most likely a lie as well, right? So yeah, it said that the chocolate rations would not be reduced, but then it was reduced by 30 grams. And as far as Winston knew, well, that was as far as he knew, because he works for them, right? But he had to make it seem as if that was not, that it was promised from the start that they would reduce rather than keep it the same. So then he does that as well alongside the other task, which was rectifying the speech about who would get attacked in what war. And this is why the paper disposals have the name memory hole, right? Because it'll basically, there's a hole in people's memory. I don't know how no one notices. I guess they just ignore it, or they're so brainwashed that they follow whatever they hear, what's the most recent, and just ignore anything else that they knew to be true, or anything else that they knew to be true in the past is now like a hole in their memory, so they don't know anymore. And it's just what is new and what's constantly being updated, and they have no recollection of like previous versions of the truth provided by the Ministry of Truth. And what's it called? As he puts the paper in the hole, like I said, new altered copies would be printed, and they would take the place of the old records or truth, the old truth, seamlessly, and just everyone just goes with it, right? And it's also said that it didn't really matter. They reference this with the example of the production of boots, right? And it was said that there was going to be like 150 million boots manufactured that year. But in fact, that didn't happen, and it was only 67 million. But it didn't matter what the actual number was, because Winston corrected it to 57 million, not 65 million, right? I think I messed up in saying that. So it was actually 65 million, but then Winston corrected it to 57 million to make it seem like more was produced than was promised, right? So it's like, oh wow, they're doing so good, right? But then the narrator says, in fact, it's unlikely that anyone even cared. It's just like, oh wow, they did a good job. Big Brother's so good. But in fact, no boots were actually manufactured, and there's still a bunch of homeless people or shoeless people walking around. But It just it's just all this is to make Big Brother look better than they actually are, even if nothing's actually being done. And there's multiple people on the same job, and the Ministry of Truth just, I guess sometimes they'll like take like a little bit from what Winston wrote versus a little bit from what someone else wrote to correct this history, and then they'll like mix it all together and create the new truth, right? And it doesn't really matter what anyone actually writes because all of it's untrue, and what was already there is probably also untrue. And yeah, so this process is for books, cartoons, films, posters, brochures, soundtracks. It even says, I don't know what soundtrack, like maybe there's like some old speak line or double think line in the soundtrack from one of the songs that I had to replace it. So photos as well, they can be like edited and replaced in addition to the newspapers, which is what Winston was working on. And this is done to eliminate any and all documentation of bad political ideologies or ideological views, right? Anything that's anything that opposes what's it called, Big Brother. Yeah, so essentially history is always being rewritten, and Big Brother made out to be correct in any predictions and be like the hero, and none of it's true, but it doesn't really matter because no one's even thinking. Like I said in the first video, as people's vocabulary shrinks, everything along with that, because like the bigger vocabulary, the more you have to express yourself, the more you can think. But if you they slowly eliminate that through first the language, then everything's gonna follow suit, right? So people just tend to think less in general as a result of the language being shrunk. And there, I mentioned before, I just have it in my note that there's the department to track down any old documentation or anything that's due for destruction. And what's due for destruction, sometimes it doesn't even matter if it was like a long time ago. No one's even thinking about it anymore because they all already have a hole in their memory. They're not thinking about it anymore. But then I guess just in case, it's gonna be rectified. And this also, what's it called? This also works to destroy any evidence of anything ever being altered, which is kind of the gaslighting. It's like, oh, wasn't that this in the past? Like, wasn't Mercedes the first car to make a roadster in the past? But then it's like, no, that was Honda. And then you have no way of proving your side that it was Mercedes, and because all the dates are corrected to like the original print date, that's what it says in the book. It shows as if that was what was originally said, like by Big Brother, or that was already what was documented, even though it wasn't. They're just like writing fake dates, basically plagiarism. But like, I don't know if you can associate the word plagiarism with this case, but it's like falsifying data, basically. And then, speaking of falsifying, nothing of the government is falsifiable because of this. You have no way of proving anything. You have no way of proving anything that's contrary to what the government wants. And all this is done via the records department in the Ministry of Truth. I wonder what the other departments are, and also how the other ministries work, because if they all have different departments, this is like a scary world. The world building of this book is great though. Like, excuse me. Yeah, the world building in this book is great. The way they're setting it all up. I just hope it's all explored thoroughly. But yeah, this is done by the Ministry of Truth, who supplies all forms of media to Oceania. If I'm pronouncing that, Oceania. Well, I don't know. But yeah, what I found out next, right? Moving on. What I found out next is that just as traitors cease to exist, and like they never existed, the word they use is unpersoned, right? So one of the notes that was like given to Winston by the speakwrite was something unpersons, something referenced, right? So there was a reference to someone who was unpersoned, which means that they never actually existed. So this is even scarier, right? Normally there'll be like a world where there's like a political criminal, right? And then after there's an example made of them, like think like Mussolini in World War II, right? Example made of him, like where his body was like hung after he died, and then like, people were like pelting things at him, right? There's an example made, basically. But in this world, if there's like a political dissidence, right, or something like that, where people are thinking differently, or anything that the government deems worthy of being like killed for, this person is unpersoned, which means that they never existed. So any record of them is gone. And it's said that this is what happened to his family, Winston's family. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I feel like it's gonna happen to him too, because yeah, his thoughts don't seem like as um like zealous for Big Brother. He seems like he's just going through the motions. But yeah, so back to my main point, right? As these like traitors are unpersoned and never existed, so any record of them's disappeared or it's gone. There's just as many people who are just invented, so they might not have actually existed. So this is brought up in Winston's task. He had a task to rectify the speech by Big Brother where he was giving Big Brother, I don't know if it's he, one person, or it's a they, multiple people in charge. But man, my computer's getting hot. Yeah, Big Brother was mentioning this one person, I forgot their name, but they were part of organization, right? And then Big Brother was giving praise to this person. And then apparently like the organization, I don't know what they did, but they were closed down, shut down, and all these people were associated with the corporation were unpersoned. We don't know the reason why, and it shows some speculation of why. And I said it could have just been just because, like no actual reason. But so because of this, there's an unpersoned person who was referenced in a Big Brother speech, right? And how does Winston rectify this? Winston rectifies this by making up a story, making up a whole backstory, and making up whatever Big Brother said about a new person who never actually existed, someone who died honorably in battle. So they died after doing like having like lived a great life dedicated to Big Brother. And this person never existed, but there's a whole backstory for them, and then they died allegedly. They didn't actually die, they never existed. But they die, and the speech that was about the other guy is now about this person who died honorably in battle. And Big Brother was praising them instead of praising the traitor, right? And now, if anyone looks back or wants to like check the records, which by like some of the things that the books already said, I doubt anyone's going to be actually checking the records. Like this all seems so fruitless, like no one's going to be like paying attention. But yeah, if anyone checks the records, is going to be talking about this new guy who honorably died, but this person never actually existed. And that just goes to show like many people referenced in this might not have actually existed. So it's going to be tough to like distinguish between, oh, did they actually exist, or was this just like a creation of someone in the records department? And I wonder like what they're thinking, like what the rest of the workers are thinking, because as for Winston, he doesn't seem like he's doing his job, which is not necessarily a good thing, but doesn't seem like he's for all this stuff that Big Brother is for. But it mentioned like this other guy, his name started with a T, who's also like Winston speculates that he's doing the same job as him. And then it's just up to the higher ups to decide whose version of the history is going to be chosen to replace this person who was unpersoned. And I actually just want to read page 53 and 54 to show how this person was imagined out of thin air and is now a historical figure in the world of 1984. And it's just like, well, it's not even 2 full pages. It's like a page and a little bit. And I thought this was like by far the most interesting 3 paragraphs I've written. I mean, I've read in a long time. So it goes like this. At the age of 3, Comrade Ogilvy, who was the new person who was invented, had refused all toys except a drum, a submachine gun, and a model helicopter. At 6, a year early, by a special relaxation of the rules, he had joined the spies. At 9, he had been a troop leader. At 11, he had denounced his uncle to the thought police after overhearing a conversation which appeared to him to have criminal tendencies. So they're even making up this kid like turning in his own family, like that. Like Winston knows what the government's gonna like, and what they're gonna want to put into this made up guy's life story biography. At 17, he had been a district organizer for the Junior Anti-Sex League. At 19, he had designed a hand grenade which had been adopted by the Ministry of Peace and which at its first trial had killed 31 Eurasian prisoners in one burst. At 23, he had perished in action, pursued by enemy jet planes while flying over the Indian Ocean with important dispatches. He had weighted his body with his machine gun and leapt out of the helicopter into deep water, dispatches and all an end, said Big Brother, which it was impossible to contemplate without feelings of envy. Big Brother added a few remarks on the purity and single-mindedness of Comrade Ogilvy's life. He was a total abstainer and non-smoker. He had no recreations except a daily hour in the gymnasium, and had taken a vow of celibacy, believing marriage and the care of a family to be incompatible with a 24-hour a day devotion to duty. He had no subjects of conversation except the principles of Ingsoc, and no aim in life except the defeat of the Eurasian enemy, and the hunting down of spies, saboteurs, thought criminals, and traitors generally. Winston debated with himself whether to award a Comrade Ogilvy the Order of Conspicuous Merit. In the end, he decided against it because of the unnecessary cross-referencing that it would entail. Once again, he glanced at his rival in the opposite cubicle. Something seemed to tell him with certainty that Tillotson, which is the other guy who was writing, that who Winston speculated was writing about the same thing as one of the slips that he got from his speakwrite, was busy on the same job himself. Yeah, it just explains that. There was no way of knowing whose job would finally be adopted, but he felt a profound conviction that it would be his own. Comrade Ogilvy, unimagined an hour ago, was now a fact. So unimagined means like never thought of before, I guess. I think I read that wrong when I was originally reading the chapter. It struck him as curious that you could create dead men but not living ones. Comrade Ogilvy, who had never existed in the present, now existed in the past, and once the act of forgery was forgotten, he would exist just as authentically and upon the same evidence as Charlemagne or Julius Caesar. And that was like, that gives a lot of insight into this world. That's the end of the chapter. So, knowing all this, I wonder how it's going to continue with Winston in his job. And I wonder how many people were on the job at the same time. Because there's Tillotson, there's Winston, there's I don't know who else. But, wow. Just making up people who never existed, and people just buy it. They don't think about it, which is another one of the scariest things about this world. If no one thinks, then they're all under control. And yeah, that's about it for this chapter. I'll be trying to get out first chapter of this other book. It's a mystery series. that video should be coming out soon. I have a bunch of scheduled videos for my Zelda playthrough. Those just kind of pre-recorded, not gonna lie. But yeah, expect a new video about a different book soon. I'll be obviously continuing this, but I just want to do multiple at once just for a little variation. And yeah, that's about it.